In the bright lights of a summer party in Fort Wayne, music was playing, teenagers were laughing, until a scream broke through the night. Two girls were fighting in the yard. Moments later, one of them fell to the ground. Her shirt was soaked in blood. By the time police arrived, 17-year-old Stacy DeGrandchamp was barely alive. She was rushed to the hospital and pronounced dead before midnight. A night that began with love and jealousy ended as one of Indiana's most haunting murder cases.
Hello, and welcome back to Dark Crimes Real.
In the spring of 2002, 17-year-old Stacy DeGrandchamp was looking ahead to her senior year at Northrop High School in Fort Wayne, Indiana. She lived with her mother, Deb, and was known as bright, confident, and full of plans. She talked often about studying computer technology at Ball State University. Friends remembered her as outgoing, easy to talk to, and always smiling. But that year, she met someone who would change everything. Brandon Muff, a 20-year-old Fort Wayne graduate. Brandon was 20, already out of school, and known for hosting parties that drew younger students. It was a scene Stacy soon became part of. Their relationship moved quickly. Stacy started spending more time at Brandon's apartment, meeting his circle of friends, a group that included Holly Boyer, a girl she had known since middle school. Years earlier, Stacy and Holly had been classmates, but a falling out during middle school left bad blood between them. At one pool party, Holly had embarrassed Stacy in front of others, and the tension never truly disappeared. Now they found themselves in the same group again, and there was another complication. Before Stacy began dating Brandon, Holly had dated him first. Even after their breakup, Holly stayed close to him, often joining his gatherings and calling him late at night. It was something everyone noticed, and something Stacy couldn't ignore. What began as quiet jealousy soon turned open. Holly made comments behind Stacy's back, laughed when she entered a room, and spread small rumors that slowly chipped away at her confidence. Friends said that Stacy tried to ignore it at first, but it was obvious. There was hostility every time the two were near each other. By the summer of 2002, Brandon's parties had become the center of their social life. Up to 30 teens would gather at his place or at friends' houses, drinking, talking, and pretending to be older than they were. It was supposed to be harmless, but between Stacy and Holly, the air was always tense. In early August, Stacy told a friend she was done with the drama and had decided to distance herself from Brandon and everyone tied to him. But that decision came too late, because within weeks, she would find herself face to face with them both again, on the night that ended her life.
It was a warm summer night in Fort Wayne. A small house party was underway on Guthrie Street. Teenagers gathered in the yard, music was loud, and the lights from the porch spilled onto the grass. That evening, 17-year-old Stacy DeGrandchamp went out with her friend Abby Oswald. The two spent time at the mall, talked about school, and tried on prom dresses. Later, Abby mentioned a get-together that Brandon Muff, Stacy's ex-boyfriend, was hosting. At first, Stacy refused. She and Brandon had broken up weeks earlier, after months of jealousy and conflict involving another girl, Holly Boyer. She didn't want to see them again, but after Abby persuaded her that it was just a small party, Stacy agreed to stop by. When they arrived, the mood was loud and restless. Around 20 people were outside, drinking, laughing, and moving between the porch and the yard. Brandon sat on the porch next to Holly. When Stacy saw them together, tension flared. Witnesses later said she walked straight toward the porch, shouting at Holly. Words turned to yelling, and yelling turned to violence. The two girls grabbed each other, pulling hair and swinging their fists. They fell onto the lawn as the crowd shouted around them. Some stepped forward to break it up, others backed away. For a short moment, Stacy appeared to be winning the fight. Then she suddenly stopped moving. Her expression changed. She reached toward her chest, stumbled, and fell near the driveway. Blood was spreading across her shirt. People began to scream. Brandon rushed to her side, yelling for help, while others scattered into the street. Police and paramedics arrived minutes later and found Stacy barely alive. She was taken to Parkview Hospital, but her injuries were fatal. 2 deep stab wounds to the chest and abdomen. She was pronounced dead before midnight. Detectives searched the yard and the house, but found no weapon. Several kitchen knives were collected. None matched the wounds. Holly denied having a knife. Brandon claimed Stacy might have fallen on something sharp. Yet investigators found no broken glass or sharp debris anywhere near her. A 17-year-old girl was dead, surrounded by 20 witnesses, and still no one could explain what had really happened. The investigation began within hours, but from the very first interviews, detectives realized the hardest part wasn't finding evidence, it was getting anyone to talk. The investigation began within hours of Stacy's death. Detectives from the Fort Wayne Police Department interviewed everyone who had been at the party that night. What they got back was confusion, denial, and silence. Holly Boyer was questioned first. She admitted the argument, but said it was nothing more than a fight. According to her, both girls had fallen near the trash cans, and Stacy might have landed on broken glass. She denied having a knife or ever using one. Next came Brandon Muff. He appeared shaken. His shirt was stained with blood, and he said he had only tried to break up the fight. He told police he pulled Stacy away by her ankles, thinking she was still angry, until he realized she was bleeding. When asked how she could have been stabbed, he gave the same answer as Holly: maybe glass, maybe an accident. Officers returned to the scene to check. They searched the driveway, the grass, the trash area. There was no broken glass, no sharp debris, and no trail of blood where Holly claimed the fight ended. Forensic teams took photos and samples, marking every trace of evidence under the floodlights. At Parkview Hospital, the coroner confirmed the injuries were not accidental. 2 clean, deep stab wounds, consistent with a knife, not glass. 1 wound pierced her chest, the other her upper abdomen. Without a weapon, without a confession, and with every witness repeating the same vague story, detectives had little to move forward with. Some of the teenagers said they hadn't seen anything. Others changed their accounts or refused to give formal statements. The fear of blame or loyalty to friends created a wall of silence that no one wanted to break. In the weeks that followed, the case went cold. Rumors spread through Fort Wayne High School that Brandon had set Stacy up, that Holly brought the knife, that the fight had been planned. None of it could be proven. Detectives kept the file open, but without new evidence, it slowly drifted into the stack of unresolved homicides. At Stacy's funeral, hundreds came to say goodbye. Friends, teachers, and even some who had been at the party stood quietly, unsure what to say. Holly was not among them. Brandon showed up, but kept to himself, standing at the back. For many in the crowd, his presence raised more questions than it answered. Weeks turned to months, and then to years. The people who had once been teenagers grew up, left town, and started new lives. But for Stacy's family, time didn't dull the loss. They still believed someone at that party knew the truth, and someday, one of them would finally speak. 17 years later, a single letter from Stacy's cousin would force that silence to break and bring detectives back to the one person who had never let go of the truth. 17 years passed. The file on Stacy DeGrandchamp's death sat in storage, marked as inactive. For her family, the silence was unbearable. They had lost a daughter, a sister, and never received an answer. But one person refused to let the case die: Stacy's cousin, Jaime McMillan. In early 2019, Jaime wrote to the Fort Wayne Police Department asking them to reopen the investigation. Her letter was short but direct. 17 years is a long time. People change. Maybe someone's finally ready to talk. Detective Brian Martin received the case. He began where his predecessors left off, by reading every report, every statement, every inconsistency. What stood out was how rehearsed the witness accounts were. Each version sounded almost identical. The same words, the same story about glass, and still no weapon. Martin decided to start over. He tracked down everyone involved, beginning with those who'd been closest to Stacy that night. He first met Abby Oswald, the friend who'd gone with Stacy to the party. Abby's memory hadn't changed. She said she saw the two girls arguing, saw them fall, but never saw a knife. She looked down during most of the fight and only realized something was wrong when she saw blood on Stacy's shirt. Next, Martin reached out to Brandon Muff, now in his late 30s. He looked older, quieter, but the story was still the same. He claimed he only tried to break up the fight. When asked directly if Holly had a knife, he hesitated, then said no, but something in his tone made Martin suspect he wasn't telling everything. Weeks later, the detective located Holly Boyer, now living under her married name, Holly Boisvert, in Wisconsin. When Martin arrived at her door, she looked shocked to see a badge from Fort Wayne. She invited him in, nervous but polite. During the interview, Holly repeated what she had told police 17 years earlier, that it was just a fight, that Stacy fell, that she never had a knife. But Martin wasn't convinced. He asked one question that changed everything. "Do you still have the knife you carried back then?" Holly froze. After a long silence, she stood up, walked down the hallway, and disappeared into her bedroom. When she returned, she was holding a small, folding knife. Martin took it into evidence. Forensic testing revealed no DNA traces. Too much time had passed. But when the blade was compared to the autopsy photos, the match was clear. The size, the depth, the shape, it fit perfectly. It was the knife that ended Stacy DeGrandchamp's life. Once the knife was recovered, Detective Brian Martin confronted Holly Boisvert again. This time, the conversation didn't sound like an interview. It sounded like a confession waiting to happen. Holly admitted she had carried that folding knife the night of the party. She claimed it was for protection, something she often kept with her. When the fight with Stacy broke out, she said she panicked, pulled the knife, and didn't remember what happened next. Afterward, she realized Stacy was bleeding and dropped the weapon. For years, she said, she couldn't throw it away. She moved houses, packed it with her belongings, and kept it hidden in a drawer. The guilt followed her everywhere. During the interview, her voice cracked when she said, "I think I killed my best friend." Detectives sent the knife for expert review. The chief pathologist who had conducted Stacy's autopsy in 2002 compared the photographs and the recovered blade. The measurements matched exactly. It was the weapon used that night. In March 2020, Holly Boisvert was arrested and charged with murder in connection with Stacy DeGrandchamp's death. For Stacy's family, it was the first real progress in nearly 2 decades. But the case didn't go to trial immediately. Months of hearings followed, with Holly's defense claiming the stabbing was unintentional and happened in self-defense. By late 2021, after negotiations with prosecutors and discussions with Stacy's family, Holly agreed to a plea deal. The murder charge was reduced to voluntary manslaughter. She pleaded guilty and took full responsibility for what happened that night. In January 2022, the court sentenced Holly Boisvert to 25 years in prison, with 5 years suspended and 3 years of probation to follow.
Under Indiana law, with credit for time served and good behavior, she could be eligible for release by 2030. At the sentencing hearing, Stacy's family sat quietly as Holly spoke. Through tears, she said, "If I could trade places with her, I would." Her words couldn't undo what had happened, but for the first time in 19 years, there was acknowledgement and a measure of justice. For Stacy's cousin Jamie, who had pushed for the case to be reopened, it wasn't about punishment, it was about truth. She told reporters, "It's not closure, but it's finally justice." After nearly 2 decades, the weapon was found, the killer confessed, and the silence that had followed Stacy's death was finally broken. But one question still remained. Why did Holly keep the knife for 17 years? For 17 years, the knife stayed hidden, moved from one house to another, packed into boxes and carried across state lines. It was never cleaned, never thrown away. Holly Boisford kept it the same way she left it that night, a small folding knife wrapped in guilt. Investigators and psychologists later described this kind of behavior as guilt retention, when an offender keeps the object tied to their crime, unable to destroy it, yet unable to face it. For Holly, the knife was both a secret and a punishment. Throwing it away would mean admitting what she had done. Keeping it meant living with it every single day. When Detective Brian Martin asked why she still had it, she said softly, "I don't know. I just couldn't let it go." The knife became the key to closing the case, but also a symbol of what had been lost: a life, a friendship, and nearly 2 decades of silence. In court, prosecutors called the case an accident that became a tragedy. For Stacy's family, it was more than that. It was the end of a question that had haunted them for 19 years. After the sentencing, Jaime McMillan said, "Justice didn't bring Stacy back, but it gave us the truth we'd been waiting for." Today, Holly remains in prison, serving her sentence at the Indiana Women's Facility. She will be eligible for release in 2030. By then, 28 years will have passed since the night that changed everything. Stacy DeGrandchamp never made it past 17. Her life ended on a summer night surrounded by friends who didn't know how to speak the truth. 17 years later, justice came, not through vengeance, but through memory. And the girl who never made it past 17 was finally remembered.